In January 1904, a family came from Bournemouth to settle in their new home at Cuckoo Hill, near Gorley on the north edge of the New Forest. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon as the vans came up the lane, as the locals pronounced it, and they became stuck, immovably, in the clay. There was nothing to be done but for everybody to get out, for the possessions to be unloaded, and all the inhabitants of Gorley helped to take them and the possessions up to the new house. So who was this family that came to Cuckoo Hill in 1904? Well, they were the family of Heywood Sumner, and he was born in 1853, the son of the Bishop of Guildford, and his mother was Mary Sumner, who became the founder of the Mothers' Union. While Haywood Sumner was an undergraduate at Oxford, he became very interested in the arts and crafts movement and became a very good craftsman and painter. And then he married Agnes Benson, and they lived in London for a while, where he was very much involved in the scene there, the arts and crafts scene. But Agnes's health deteriorated, and so to help that, they moved to Bournemouth. But unfortunately, she still wasn't that well in Bournemouth, and so that's why they came to Cuckoo Hill, a place that Heywood Sumner had researched and known and loved over quite a few years. He lived here, or they lived here, for the next 36 years. Very happy years when he researched the archaeology and the folklore and the geology and everything to do with this area. So Cuckoo Hill as a house still stands. It's no longer the family home, and it's no longer known as Cuckoo Hill. It's called the Haywood Sumner House, and is now a care home for young adults. In 1905, when Heywood Sumner and his family had settled into their new home at Cuckoo Hill, Heywood Sumner wrote a book, the Book of Gorley. And in his introduction he says, "Gorley means the open forest place where cattle lie, and this book is a chronicle, written at leisure, of the making of our new home on Cuckoo Hill at South Gorley, and of the life that surrounds us here at the edge of the New Forest." This book is quite unique in the way it is handwritten by Heywood Sumner and illustrated with his beautiful watercolours, and he became immersed in the archaeology, natural history and life of the area. And so in this book we see his personal journey, but also a guide, a book of the history, customs, topography and nature of a now vanished world. So in this book there is about the making of their new home at Cuckoo Hill, and indeed Heywood Sumner goes into great detail about how he purchased the land, how the house was built, and how they moved there, and the difficulties they had, and the pleasures that they had. And then he talks about the common, of what happens on the common, and the difference between foresters and commoners. Talks about the different names of places and what they may mean. One of his pleasures, or the whole family's pleasure, was to visit the people who lived around them. And so we see pictures and stories about the inhabitants who lived there, some of them extremely old. But also he really was so interested in the antiquities and what he found under the ground, the old settlements that were there. We walked up through the trees behind Cuckoo Hill and have come on to the gravelly track above Chibden Bottom, And Heywood Sumner writes about this at various places in his book, talking about the different activities and the different vegetation and life on it. But one of the first things we see is this clump of trees here, and they are called Robin Hood's clump. A clump of Scots fir and Weymouth pine. And why are they here? Well, the story is told that they were planted by the second Lord Normanton to give landmarks and variety to his view of the long line of the New Forest hills from Summerley. There are 3 lots altogether, but this one we can see is Robin Hood's called, and it was planted about 1850. He also tells a story which one of his neighbours says, that a hollow near the green track from Cuckoo Hill to Robin Hood's clump was made for a cockpit, and here cockfighting might be enjoyed without disturbance. We're walking along the uplands now, and it's very evident the chalky, gravelly bits on the land, and with the heather growing up through it. We've stopped to have our lunch at North Hollow Gravel Pit, thinking we'd be out of the wind, but we aren't. Anyway, Heywood Sumner writes about this very gravel pit because he said it has the reputation of supplying the best gravel hereabouts. It is rich golden brown in colour and has enough clay in its substance to make it bind well. This mixture of clay with the plateau gravel of our hilltops and the consequent slow filtration of the rainfall probably account for the constancy of our springs. Like charity, they never fail. Yet it is traditional, this drought in the valleys and water on the hills. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. So do we. As we walk across the common, there are many different trackways, and as Heywood Sumner writes, they must have been maybe more used in the British and Roman days when the potters were plying their trade at Slodden. On the common are great tracts of fern, and that is one of the harvests of the forest, as well as holly. In the autumn, the ferns are collected to supply litter for the small farmers who are not men of straw. One of the chapters in Heywood Sumner's book is entitled The Forest, and he says, "The forest suggests trees, green tracks through interminable trees, no clear sky, but above waving branches below, tree trunks entangle, shadowy gloom as the trees descend the valleys, and a broken vision of multitudinous treetops on wooded hills, up and down, trees, trees, innumerable trees." But this does not describe our side of the forest. Here, on the northern side, we have long rolling hills of heather, fern and furze, worn into 5 parallel ridges and furrows by streams that trickle in dry and rush in wet weather down gravelly courses to the broad valley of the Avon. Here and there are thickets of holly, thorn, yew and crabapple. Here and there are old woods of oak, beech, yew, holly, thorn and whitebeam. Here and there are enclosures of Scots fir, oak and sweet chestnut. But the main features of our side of the New Forest are heather uplands, winding moorland, streams and scattered woods. The open country is never far distant. Heywood Sumner was a keen amateur archaeologist, and he writes in his book that every place has its antiquities, yet to write of the antiquities of the common may suggest the inversion of ancient and modern. For the most ancient barrows and marks on the common are new compared with its own essential permanence. Plain, whale-backed hills and hollows like the troughs of ocean rollers tell of primeval seas, of upheaval from sea floor to dry land, and of down-rushing rains in the dim years of unaccountable period. And all the change that chance and time have wrought on the common has merely resulted in furrows that have deepened on its old face, and in hills more rounded beneath the element. Sumner's work as an archaeologist began in 1911 when he was 58 years old. He undertook extensive surveys of the New Forest, which were published in 2 finely illustrated volumes in 1913 and 1917. These set a new standard for archaeological illustration, which has been much imitated but rarely bettered. He became a member of Salisbury Museum's governing committee in 1914 and remained involved until the 1930s. The work for which Sumner is best known is his excavation of the Roman pottery kilns in the New Forest. This research was usually undertaken alone and on a small scale. However, inspired by Lieutenant General Pitt Rivers, his work was fully published in books that captured both his enthusiasm for Roman archaeology and his passion for the New Forest. His finds were donated to Salisbury Museum, Bournemouth Natural Science Society and the British Museum. We are walking up Gorley Hill to Gorley Common on a rather muggy morning, surrounded by lots of little insects and massive bracken on either side, and we're thinking of Heywood Sumner, as he could have walked would have walked the very same walk when he would be observing the flora and the fauna and anything else that took his fancy, and maybe making sketches. And really the countryside hasn't changed very much. Obviously there are new houses built, and we can hear the traffic, which wouldn't have been around then. But otherwise, it's much as he would have found it. We have come up to Gorley Common, and Heywood Sumner makes some interesting points about the commoner's rights. He says, for example, common rights allow me, as a freeholder in the parish, to turn out as many beasts as I like without payment, to dig as much gravel, sand or soil, and to cut as much turf, gorse, fern or heath as I require, provided it is for my own use in the parish. On the other hand, a commoner may not cut a tree on the common, but he may pull one up, a distinction which prevents the lord of the manor from planting trees on the common against the will of the commoners. A commoner has no right to shoot nor to fish, nor may he dig sandstone. We are walking down from Gorley Common through this lovely shaded sunken lane, or droke as Heywood Sumner explains it's called locally, and we're walking down to Hawkins Brook. It's all very still. Heywood Sumner explains the meaning of the word droke. It's an old trackway that leads onto the common, and it may come from the Anglo-Saxon dragon or drogue, which means to drag or to proceed. We're standing on a bridge over Huckle's Brook, and this name comes as a diminutive from huck or a hook, a brook of little bends, and Heywood Sumner says that's a description that certainly applies. And the colour is very brown. It's from iron deposits. We're climbing up to Dorridge Hill and we can see it behind me, and there are Scots fir and Weymouth pine trees amongst the other trees, and they were planted, more trees which were planted by the second Lord Normanton, as he did at Robin Hood's, to give landmark and variety to his view of the long line of the New Forest Hills from Summerley. Dorridge trees were planted in 1835, and Dorridge is the highest ground on the common, 257 feet above the sea level, while the lowest part is at the cattle stop, where the Huckles Brook leaves the common, which is where we've just been, and that's 100 feet above the sea level. We have come to the top of Dorridge Hill, though it's not a hill as you imagine, it's more a ridge, part of the common. And Heywood Sumner explains that it could mean a hill-fort ridge from the Anglo-Saxon, or it could mean a deer ridge, or a dark ridge, as the words are very similar in Anglo-Saxon. We've come down from Dorridge Hill to Huckles Brook, and this seems a suitable place for Heywood Sumner to have the last word. For he says, "I like a book either to have a preface or a postscript. In fact, I like both a greeting and a farewell from the author. I like to know why he sought his own particular subject, and in what mood he completed the long work of patient days. I like to compare my estimate of his results with his intention. Accordingly, I suppose a similar vein of quiet curiosity in you, my reader, as you come to the end of these leisurely pages. Curiosity that a man should spend laborious days with pen and pencil, writing and drawing the chronicle of on an obscure locality, at a time when most men cared for eager competition in 100 different spheres, and when England was humming with 100 different party cries. Well, man does not live by competition alone, nor by party meetings. A remnant is left of those who do not willingly compete, who love golden silence rather than silver speech-making, and who think that work rightly done is the first thing needful in these days of chatter. I love dealing with materials so as to express a designed plan. I love Mother Earth. I like endeavour and excellence that comes by the way, that grow out of everyday life, not forced by exhibitions and success and fuss. And the change and chance of time that have brought us here have likewise provided my subject and my equipment for making this book. I think that all good country books are rooted in a locality. They may almost seem to be dormant in the soil, awaiting the beneficent advent that gives them shape. And if there is any good in these pages, it is born of my love of earth and of recreation. I have wished to record my keen enjoyment in the life around us, and I think that happiness grows from quiet, curious interest in the affairs and setting of our own daily life. Thus we may gain contentment and knowledge, founded on questioning observation, and thus we may hand on some vision of the days that pass and are no more, if we see and record with understanding. There's the rub. However, you know my intention. It is for you to estimate, and so farewell. May the nether pavement of good intentions not be increased by the Book of Gorley.